My name's Greg. I'm 61. I'd like to work at being a better person.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm 49 years of age and one day I'd like to walk my daughter down the aisle.
My name's Lisa. I'm 47 years old and I wish for a happier life.
I'd woken up in the morning with one morning with a lump in my throat, which I had noticed, and ended up having to get both an ultrasound and then a small biopsy. Returning to my GP a few days later to get the results, he had misread the report and consequently told me that I had lung cancer. So he then immediately made an appointment for an oncologist for 2 days later. And so when I walked into the oncologist and he said, "What are you here for?" which is that sort of style, I said, "Look, I've got lung cancer." And he said, "No, you haven't. Your GP has misdiagnosed it." And he thought it might have been in the throat. There was an ENT, throat surgeon, in an adjoining office, and I was able to get him to see him within half an hour. He did a scope, and at the end of that said, "I think I've found it." And so the consequence was that I'd gone from, in the space of an hour and a half or so, walking into the oncologist thinking that life was going to be pretty short and not too great, through to suddenly finding it was a completely different diagnosis and we could start talking about treatment.
I was diagnosed in August of 2013 and it was after an CT scan from 6 months of a sinus infection. It was pure shock. My diagnosis was of adenocarcinoma tumour in my sinuses, so my left sinus. So I had a tumour that was just near the bottom of coming out of my nose, and then grown up into my brain and into my left eye. So it was pretty substantial. So shock. Night before I was going on a 4-day, a long weekend with my wife. We flew to Daydream Island, which we'd had planned for quite a while, and that was certainly a really good decision even though it was the night before, hearing the diagnosis at 9 o'clock in the evening, and then we were due to fly out to Daydream Island 4 a.m. the next morning. And just the decision as to, do we tell our daughter now, or do we just leave it? We go, pretend nothing's wrong, which we ended up doing, and it gave us the time to process.
I was actually at work and my specialist called me to give me the news, and then I organised to go and see him after work and have a big talk about the situation. I took my mum with me just to go into it a lot further. I wasn't expecting it at all, but neither was he. He was very upset actually, and even had the tests retested. I didn't write anything down, that's why I took my mother with me so that she'd ask things and remember things that I may not have. But I did ask, lots of questions and got the ins and outs.
So my treatment consisted of, in the end, a very intensive period of chemo over a couple of months, and then radiotherapy over a few months. At the time of the initial discussion about treatment, the oncologist, his phrase was pretty much, "We might give you a little bit of chemo before we start radiotherapy." And so he understated it enormously. And I had quite a shock when a couple of weeks prior they said, "Well, you're actually going to go into hospital for a week at a time and be on a drip 24 hours a day. And you're going to do that 3 times."
I was given 2 options: no treatment at all and radiation therapy, and they said the tumour would keep growing and eventually kill me, or surgery and to remove the tumour, and the prognosis was good. So I chose to go ahead with the surgery.
In the few weeks before treatment actually started, I guess that was my most anxious period because it's an unknown, because, you know, people talk about chemo, and if you don't have any experience of it, then you have no idea what to expect at all. So it's the unknown. What I found, however, was once I had a treatment plan, I was quite a different person.
Well, with my specialist, he wanted to just do the simple sort of surgery to start with, not going right into the big operation. So we tried to avoid that as best as we could. So we decided just to do some small surgeries before we tackle the big one, hoping that we wouldn't have to do the big surgery.
I never felt about getting a second opinion. Look, a little bit in part because effectively the ear, nose, throat surgeon had sort of confirmed what the oncologist had said. So I guess in terms of diagnosis, I remember thinking, well, they know what it is. I jumped on the internet pretty much straight away, and it told me that there'd be surgery. What was challenging about that was that both the oncologist and the ear, nose, throat surgeon both made the same comment, which is, we don't want to do any surgery on this.
Because of what I perceive as a relatively short time, 3 weeks between diagnosis and surgery, it really was a matter of focusing on the surgery coming up, and I was told that I would need to have radiation therapy as a preventative rather than a curative treatment. So, yeah, I was provided some written information. I was provided some written information about ear, nose and throat surgeries, and spoke to family, which have been an enormous support during this. I can't thank them enough, but also focus on, or reiterate enough, it's important to have people, if you have access to them, to support you. My mum's been a palliative care nurse. That was just amazingly important. So she, through family connections, she knew a whole lot of oncologists and surgeons, and so she immediately started speaking to them.
With hindsight, I should have probably rung the Cancer Council, and hindsight is, of course, because I now know a lot about what they offer. At the time, although I went onto their website, it really probably didn't occur to me to ring them to find out more information.
I also switched from spending too much time focusing on myself to making sure that my wife and daughter were going to be provided for, whatever happened. So I focused on going through all my insurance policies, going and seeing the accountant with my wife and making some plans so that she knew she had the contact and the support there, so she didn't have to think about those things. And also putting in place a support team for my wife, because, look, in my experience, it's nearly harder on the family. So appointing a medical and financial power of attorney, sitting down with my wife, my sister and my cousin, and talking to them about what I wanted from treatment, and if things went wrong, end of life decisions, those sort of things, resus. So I tended to focus on the mechanics and the doing things more than focusing too much on the what ifs and getting all tied up with too much of the negative emotion.
The amount of information was a really challenging thing all the way through, because there are times when you're told so many things that you really don't process it, and it's only afterwards you reflect back and think, what have I been told? But on the other hand, you constantly have questions going through your mind of things you would like to know. So you sort of have this almost a turmoil going on in the early stages, where you're trying to cope with an influx of information, but get the answers that you want. The treatment was in two parts. For the first about 2.5 months, I went through 3 cycles of chemo, and each cycle was a week long on a drip, 24 hours in hospital. I then had a break of a few weeks and then went into 7 weeks of radiotherapy, which was 5 days a week, day treatment, with 3 additional overnight chemo treatments.
My initial operation was on the 18th of September 2013, and that was to remove the tumour. And that was to be done endoscopically, up my nose, and it was amazing. So they managed to remove the tumour, cut out the bone, the bit of the bone that separates my brain and my sinuses, and put in a graft from my leg, which is a sling that is in behind my forehead, my eyebrows.
Okay, so the best way was we do a wide local incision of the tongue and take out what they can and test it and do that procedure, and that's what we did. And fortunately, that's all that had to happen at that stage. But then unfortunately, they didn't take enough out. It was still showing signs of cancer. So I had to have a second surgery to remove more. And that's, and then it came back that it was gone. And so that was all wonderful at that stage. Then it came back, and that's when I had to do the head and neck dissection and have the more serious surgery. So, yes, I did have family to consider. I had to give up work because it was a massive operation and the treatment was very intense and long. I had chemotherapy and radiotherapy for 6 weeks. The chemo I had once a week and the radiotherapy was every day for 6 weeks. And I was seeing a dietitian and speech pathology at the time as well, and of course my oncologist. Nausea
varied according to which cycle, and for me it was cumulative. So as the cycles went on, I got worse and worse. However, I think in comparison to lots of people, most of the anti-nausea drugs helped me. So, I was able to get through that. With the radiotherapy, fatigue was a huge thing. So what I found in the end was that by the afternoon, midway through radiotherapy, I just had to sleep. I
returned to work about 7 months after, or 7 or 8 months after my initial surgery, part-time, and I was able to do light duties and things, but I'd do a couple of hours and go and sleep on the couch in the consultation room and things like that. So it wasn't a good idea to return to work. It was way too early. In hindsight, having the support of a rehab consultant would have been best, which I have now. I was way too hard on myself trying to get back into it. I did have a reflections diary that my girlfriend gave me, so I was keeping that and filling that in, and that helped actually. When I first saw it, I thought, oh no, but it did. It was very, very nice to be able to write your thoughts and stuff down. I did start writing down one day in hospital, and I was at a fairly low moment. What were some of the things that I would like to do if I got through it? And so that helped me a bit, I think, to do that. And it was more the goals rather than writing about my experience. Some of the things we wish we would have known going into the public health system for a long period of time. Parking was a huge one. I think my wife ran up about $600 worth of parking fees before she became aware that there was a social worker and that we could access, or she could access, support, like parking vouchers and things like that, so that she didn't have to pay for parking. Other things like support groups, of which I'm now a member of, because I was on a surgical ward rather than in our case, the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Centre, which has been amazing, that I slipped through the gaps of cancer support, learning about things like exercise, diet, and it's been proven now how beneficial exercise is. But it being appropriate, having someone to help you through that, being able to access hospital services around an exercise physiologist. My experience of the public system was it's pretty overwhelmed at times, and so that's not always offered, so you do need to ask.
We never really received a lot of information on any support services at any stage during our treatment. For example, we had no information on social services, social welfare, how are we going to fund travel, because all my treatment involved significant travel because I live in a rural area outside of Melbourne. We were never given any of those that information at all, other than often you were pointed to brochures. Someone mentioned at one point that there were government allowances available that would fund the travel, and then we went to see the social worker and we got some return back from that. But those things, we discovered mainly by accident rather than anything else. When you finish treatment and you go back to your oncologist, you're feeling, great, this is all done now, and you in the back of your mind you're really hoping, well, that's right, I've done this. And of course the oncologist is never going to be anything more than low key and okay, that's fine, I'll see you in 3 months' time. And so that's a really challenging thing, because you want to celebrate, and yet the message you receive, which is the right message, is that look, it's not over yet, and in fact this is going to go on for quite a long time. One of the things that I've actually struggled with a fair bit is that a sense of guilt that I've managed to get through all the treatment, and at this stage my prognosis is fine. And during that time you're aware of other people and better people who haven't. And I've really struggled with that, and that sense that, that I should be doing something better than I am. So one of the things that I looked at very early on was voluntary work for the Cancer Council. And I read about the Cancer Connect program, which is connects people who are going through a similar cancer diagnosis to you, and it's a phone support service, and that's been incredibly rewarding from my point of view, and it's something with hindsight I wished I'd learnt about when I went through diagnosis, because I've probably mentioned this, in the end there are some things that no matter how close your family and friends are, they can't empathise with. You need someone who's gone through that process. So, yeah.
I wish that I had have gone into all the information a lot deeper, a lot more, especially the treatment. And definitely I would have loved to have met people who were in a similar situation and to see how they're coping and how they coped and where they are now. That was the biggest thing. I would have loved to have had a group.
Take advantage of support services. Ask for help. Don't try and struggle through on your own. I couldn't have done this without support. I see a psychologist and a psychiatrist. It's really important to have somebody available to you, other than family and friends who've got their own stuff, someone who you can talk to about anything, say anything to, who's your person, and help you work through some of those things and normalise them.
Well, I'm still trying to hang on to my sense of humour and personality, but at times it can, be quite difficult. But still trying to be my old self. My wife and my relationship has certainly
I think it's intensified. We've become closer, having gone through this experience. But it's had an enormous toll on my wife, being a full-time carer, really. So it's really important for people who support patients on a cancer journey that they get support as well. I can't, again, reiterate that having support, reaching out to things like cancer carers support groups. Carers support groups can be really important. We're fortunate to have a really good, close group of friends who are very supportive of my wife. That self-care is really important too.